What about JFK? You know, there's this document from 2005 it was FOIA'd in 2005, and by a guy named, I think, William Lester. And I've tried to get in touch with this guy multiple times because I want to know whether it's real or fake. It's like another thing, like the Oppenheimer thing, where it's like if Oppenheimer was involved with UFOs, that's this crazy smoking gun that would really change the public consensus. If JFK was looking into UFOs at the end of his life, and we know that, that also would be this really important fact for people to know. And so it's this letter that was FOIA'd in 2005, but it's from November 12th, 1963, so 10 days before he's shot in Dallas. And it's a letter from him to acting CIA Director John McCone. And he's saying, I want all of the data on unknowns. But by unknowns, he means UFOs. Yep. And he's saying specifically, I'm worried about, the USSR freaking out because, they're seeing these UFOs in their airspace and they think they're acts of American aggression. Yeah. And so do you think that letter might have been real, or? I mean,
Might have been real, might not have been. I don't know. I do know that when I was working with Dick Billings. Dick Billings was the chief staff writer for the House Select Committee on Assassinations, and he was one of my investigators, actually at the Christic Institute back in Washington, and he and I were investigating the assassination because he was a very, very important guy. He's the guy that got the Zapruder film down in Dallas, and he was the guy he was the Life magazine guy for Miami, the Miami office, and was full. And he ran the Life magazine team that was on the ground in Dallas the day of the assassination. Afterwards, he's the guy that got the Zapruder film. He knows all about all that stuff. I had just been over on the Hill meeting with Tip O'Neill, and also with on the Senate side was Claiborne Pell, and showing them copies of the complaint that we had drafted.
Claiborne Pell, by the way, is super interested in parapsychology and all sorts of crazy stuff. And he was Biden's mentor all throughout his career. So anyways, keep going.
So the bottom line is I'd been over on the Hill. I was showing them copies of the complaint that we had prepared and had filed already down in Miami. Bottom line is I come back to my office, and I walk into the office, 1324 North Capitol Street, just 13 blocks from the Capitol. Walk in, and Patty Austin was my secretary. She says, Danny, there's an older gentleman here waiting to see you. And I said, well, who is it? She said, I don't know. He didn't give me his name. And I said, well, where is he? And she said, he's up in your office, sitting, waiting for you. And so I said, oh, all right. So I go upstairs, I go into my office, and I walk over, and here's this guy. He looks like he's about 65 years old or something like this. And so I walk over, and I said, hi, I'm Danny Sheehan. He said, great, it's good to meet you, Mr. Sheehan, and never told me what his name was. And so I go back and I get behind my desk and I say, okay, what can I do for you? He said, look, he said, I've got a copy of your complaint here. And he pulls out a copy of the complaint, which had been sealed, actually, by Judge James Lawrence King down in Florida, just the previous Friday. And so I was kind of a little bit taken aback that he had it. And he said, you don't know who I am at all. I said, yeah, I noticed that. And he said, but look, I just want to ask you a few questions. You don't have to answer me if you don't want, but I think I might be able to help you on this. I said, okay, what? He said, now you got 29 people listed here as the defendants in your Iran-Contra, federal criminal racketeering complaint you've got filed against them. He said, who do you think is the most important? And I said, well, a lot of people would think it's because Theodore Shackley was the ADDO, the Associate Deputy Director for Operations of the CIA, running covert operations, and he was the immediate boss of the fellow who was the National Security Advisor for George Bush Sr., who's the Vice President. I said, so that, in since that's the guy in whose office they've been meeting the Iran-Contra people. and Felix Rodriguez and the guys were meeting with him, and so a lot of people would think that that's the reason I think that he's the most important. And he said, but that's not the reason why you think he's the most important. And I said, no. He said, well, why do you think he's the most important? I said, because he was the CIA station chief in Miami on November 22nd of 1963. And he said there aren't two men in the world that would have answered that question that way. He said, my name is Dick Billings. I was the chief staff writer for the House Select Committee on Assassinations. I think I can help you out on this case. And that's how it started. We found out that Kennedy, on June 5th of 1963, and this would be, June, July, August, September, October, like 5 months earlier, that he had asked to be briefed on the UFO stuff. He wanted all the UFO stuff on June 5th. That was the same day that Bobby Kennedy had been first notified about the existence of the political assassination team that had been put together by Richard Nixon back in 1960 when he was the vice president and the chair of the 5412 committee under Eisenhower.
Here is a bulletin from CBS News. In Dallas, Texas, 3 shots were fired at President Kennedy's motorcade in downtown Dallas.
Do you think that the CIA killed JFK?
Not exactly.
Okay.
Not exactly, but I do know who did kill him, and I do know that it was an S-force. It was a 15-man force that was created back in 1960, actually, by Richard Nixon.
And this was the force created to go after Castro?
Kill Castro, to kill Fidel Castro, Raul Castro, Che Guevara, and 5 particular commandantes of the new government.
And so why did Nixon create this force?
To kill Castro. He realized actually what he did, strangely enough, is he called Howard Hughes. Was the day that Nelson Rockefeller withdrew from the Michigan state primary in the Republican presidential primary campaign was the day that Richard Nixon knew he was going to be the Republican nominee in 1960. Okay, and he knew that this Kennedy kid, whose father, had basically bought him a seat, in the Congress, and that he was this kind of, hollow vehicle, he was going to beat him. And so what he did is picks up the telephone, the security phone in the 5412 committee of the National Security Council, and calls Howard Hughes, because Howard Hughes was a secret consultant to the National Security Council. He'd invented the Glomar Explorer to pick up Russian submarines if they fail and fall to the bottom of the ocean. He did the C-5A cargo plane, the big Spruce Goose, and he was doing 2 other extremely sensitive programs.
What was he doing?
I can't tell you that, but the bottom line is he was close in.
Well, he must have been working on UFO stuff too.
No, he was not.
He wasn't?
He was not. No, they hadn't gotten him in on that. He was doing things much more kind of military, kind of prosaic military stuff. So the bottom line is Nixon knew him because of that, because Nixon chaired the 5412 committee as the vice president under Eisenhower in 1960. So he chaired that 5412 committee that's in charge of covert operations.